Professor Pig is one of Batman's most insane villains, and Batman has a lot of crazy villains, but Professor Pig takes it to a whole nother level. He is one of Batman's most underrated villains, and he deserves to be a lot more popular. Today's video is why Professor Pig is such a great villain. Originally, he was a scientist named Laszlo Valentine who suffered from schizophrenia, and he ended up just being very obsessed with perfection. He has all these victims that he's trying to make perfect, which are his Dolatrons. Professor Pig is so unique and he's delusional. He believes what he's doing is right. He believes what he's doing is making all of his victims perfect. But clearly, this is not the case. He is mutilating their bodies. He is changing them, trying to make them the way he thinks is better. But clearly, we see what he does to them is not actually improving them. It's not helping them. It's not making them better. It's not making them perfect. He's trying to make them perfect, but he's not doing a good job. And he really does believe what he's doing is right. So he's clearly out of his mind. I mean, he is extremely dangerous because he's willing to do these things just because he thinks it's right. And he doesn't realize that it's wrong. He's like a psychopath. He doesn't have a proper understanding, and he clearly is mentally ill. So it makes sense that he has schizophrenia. Batman in Arkham Knight even probably realizes it himself because he tells Professor Pig what he is doing is wrong, and he just treats Professor Pig like he's crazy. Professor Pig has victims just hung all over Gotham, leaving them for Batman to find. And when he goes to Pretty Doll's parlor in the Arkham Knight side mission, he finds Professor Pig there, and Professor Pig just acts extremely weird, and he acts extremely unusual. I mean, there's a lot of crazy Batman villains, but the way Professor Pig acts is almost like deranged and he's just delusional. Most Batman villains are not like that. There's a lot of crazy ones, but they're not delusional, and they don't think the way that Professor Pig does. A difference between Batman's other villains and Professor Pig is many of Batman's villains are very intelligent, and Professor Pig is very intelligent. But Professor Pig, he's missing common sense. He's missing certain types of, just common awareness that people have. He doesn't understand the basics of, knowing that what he's doing is not actually helping. He doesn't realize that he's not making these people perfect. He's not doing anything that's creating any way of improvement. Any of Batman's other villains would recognize this, and they would know that what they were doing was wrong, and their actions wouldn't be helping make all these people better and closer to being perfect. Professor Pig, his obsession is just making people perfect. The thing about Professor Pig is, it makes you question, why doesn't he just make himself perfect then? You would think he would be focusing a lot more on himself, because if he's so obsessed with perfection, he should be obsessed with making himself perfect. And you'd expect him to do a lot more things to himself, and a lot more things that seem more obvious that he has done to himself. But he is mainly just going after other people, which really does make him seem like more of a villain, and it makes him seem more evil. Professor Pig is also one of Batman's most disgusting and goriest villains. I mean, the surgeries and his acts he does to his victims are truly disturbing, and He's extremely gory. Just, it can be seen as very gross and terrifying to many people. Professor Pig really is good in the aspect of horror. So if you're into horror, if you like, horror characters, horror movies, and you just like horror games, Professor Pig, he kind of fits that. He's like a horror character. He kind of is similar to, let's say, Scarecrow in a way, because a big part of their character and a big part of them being a villain is their horror aspect. And they're different because, their type of horror is different in a way. They're both scary, but in different ways. Now, Professor Pig, another way that he is one of Batman's best villains is because no matter what Batman says to him, no matter what, Batman tries to get through to him, he can't stop Professor Pig, just by talking. Professor Pig doesn't understand what Batman's trying to tell him. Professor Pig, he can't be talked out of doing what he's doing because he really does believe what he's doing is right. And he's just completely delusional. Batman, his only way of stopping him is, just beating him up, taking him out, physically, locking him up in a cell, putting him in Arkham Asylum. And with as crazy and insane and delusional as Professor Pig is, he also has a very unique way of thinking, which makes him very unpredictable. Professor Pig is clearly a very violent individual. I mean, he regularly decides to do these violent acts, whether it's on his victims or with his interactions with Batman. He'll start interacting violently, trying to throw knives or just hurt or attack Batman. So he clearly has some messed up morals, because I understand he's trying to make things perfect, but he clearly doesn't have a sense of good and bad. I don't think he has the proper understanding of, what good and bad is, because if he did, I don't think he would be going at the situation and approaching it the way he is. He's willing to harm people. He's willing to attack people. He's willing to, be violent to get his way, which shows that he has a lack of morals or moral understanding. And Professor Pig is intelligent, but I think he's missing intelligence overall. There is certain ways that he is very intelligent, but in his overall intelligence, there's some aspects that he's missing. Like, that's a reason why I would say it's easier for Batman to stop him, because if he was more intelligent overall, Batman wouldn't be able to take advantage of him and beat him as easily as he does in Arkham Knight. Also, Professor Pig isn't that strong or powerful. He doesn't have superpowers. But if Professor Pig was to team up with another villain, like somebody like Joker or Scarecrow, or even, let's say, Riddler, that would be actually very good for him, because in many aspects, he's very good, and he's just a really cool and interesting villain that has a lot of potential, but he's missing certain aspects to make him a harder challenge for Batman. So if he was to team up with another villain that could fill those missing things to make him, more of a challenge for Batman and make him more of a problem, he could be a huge threat, and it could be great. I mean, him and Joker are both really crazy and insane, but Joker definitely is the smarter of the two, and Joker just overall is smarter in many more ways. So Joker could find a way to use Professor Pig and use him in a way to his benefit, making him more likely to beat Batman, because Professor Pig, he can't be stopped by, talking him out of things. So Joker, he doesn't have to worry about Batman, saying something to Professor Pig and then Professor Pig deciding to give up, or Professor Pig, wanting his life to be spared because Batman says, "Oh, if you don't stop, it's over." And obviously, Batman wouldn't actually take his life, but you see the point. Professor Pig, he probably won't even understand that just because he has a lack of awareness and understanding in many ways. Professor Pig has a really interesting character design because it just looks so unusual. I mean, he wears a pig mask over his face, and even his name, the spelling of pig, is Pyg. So his whole design is just very unique, and it really stands out to me. When I first played the Arkham Knight side mission, I immediately was just so interested, and it just immediately caught my attention because I was just going around the city as Batman, finding all these victims just all over the place. And I was like, which villain is this? It really just stood out to me, and it just felt like Batman really was showing his detective skills, and we finally were getting to play as Batman more as a detective, because Batman is supposed to be the world's greatest detective, and of course Batman is a great detective. And it was just a really fun side mission, and I just had fun playing it. So when I finally found Professor Pig and saw just how strange of a character he is, and just was introduced for him for the first time, he quickly became one of my favorite Batman villains. There's many Batman villains that I like, but Professor Pig, just from seeing him in Arkham Knight, he really put him up there above many of other Batman's villains. So Professor Pig, he just overall has been getting more popular in recent years because he has been, I would say, very underrated, but now he's finally starting to get attention, and I think that's a great thing, because he should be, because, I mean, there's just so much potential for the character. If they're trying to make, let's say, like more of like a horror film, or just like, use a character that's like, more for horror or just scarier, Professor Pig is just great to have, because he could be used in a way like that for a Batman movie, or a Batman animated film, or just, a Batman series, or even in future Batman games. And I definitely want to see more of him, so I'd be glad to see him used in different ways and just used more often. So Professor Pig, without a doubt, I would have to put him in my top 10 favorite Batman villains. I would say maybe top 8, possibly top 5. I have to think about it a little bit more. But yes, Professor Pig, he is one of my favorite Batman villains. And he just seems so mysterious at the same time, since he's so unpredictable, so unusual, and his way of thinking just isn't really clear, and he doesn't really make too much sense overall. So he just feels very mysterious, which I like, because he just makes you wonder more, and he just comes off as more questionable, and you just want to know what exactly he's thinking, or what exactly he's gonna do, or what exactly he could possibly even, plan. So if I had to say Professor Pig was underrated in any way, or just underused in any way, I would say it's just the amount he was used. And overall, Professor Pig, I see him having, a bright future. I see him being used a lot more often, and I think fans are really going to start getting into him. And Professor Pig, he's just one of these villains that when you first see him, you recognize him as special and just a good villain, because there's things that stand out about him that just overall really do not only make him a great, villain, but just overall a good character, because he's well written and he's just so unique that he's just so interesting overall. And there's even people who think that Professor Pig is crazier than the Joker, and that he makes Joker look sane. I do think Joker is crazier and more insane than Professor Pig. I just think that Professor Pig is more delusional. But the point is, I think Professor Pig is one of Batman's greatest and most underrated villains, and I loved him in Arkham Knight, and I want to see more of him. Let me know in the comments, do you think Professor Pig is a really good Batman villain? Do you think he's underrated? Would you like to see him more? What would you like to see him in? Remember to subscribe and to turn on notifications. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in another Cosmic Chaos video. Bye!